Number 2. The Scriptures contain precepts in relation to civil things. Quote, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Wherefore ye must needs be subject not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon the very thing. Put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors, or unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well." Unquote. Romans 13, verses 1, 2, 5, 7, Titus 3, verse 1, and 1 Peter 2, verses 13 and 14. Number 3. Civil society is put under subjection to Christ. Quote, "Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings, be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. And there was given him a dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him, which he wrought in Christ, when he raised him from the dead, and set him at his own right hand in the heavenly places, far above all principality and power, and might and dominion, and every name that is named, not only in this world, but also in that which is to come. And hath put all things under his feet, authorities and powers being made subject unto him. And he hath his vesture, and on his thigh a name written, King of kings and Lord of lords." Unquote. Psalm 2, verses 10 through 12, Daniel 7:14, Ephesians 1, verses 20 through 22, 1 Peter 3:22, and Revelation 19, verse 16. These scriptures show that civil societies as such are under subjection to Christ, and that he hath a regal power over them. Firstly, his authority over civil societies includes the right of prescribing laws to them. Without such right, the regal power of Christ would be a nonentity. Legislation is inseparable from the regal character of Christ. Quote, "The Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us." Unquote. Isaiah 33, verse 22. Secondly, Christ makes known no law except that which is contained in the Scriptures. This alone, wherever it is known, is the statute book of his empire. Thirdly, from all which it follows that civil society is under obligation to apply the Scriptures in all their civil relations. They are bound to act on the great principles of equity contained in the written word, as well as those precepts that refer directly to civil government. Number 3. Promises are made to nations for obedience, and judgments threatened because of disobedience. Quote, "And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and do all his commandments which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come on thee and overtake thee, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God. If ye will fear the Lord, and serve him, and obey his voice, and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall both ye, and also the king that reigneth over you, continue following the Lord your God. For the Lord will not forsake his people, for his great name's sake, because it hath pleased the Lord to make you his people." Unquote. Deuteronomy 28, verses 1 and 2, 1 Samuel 12, verses 14 and 22. Firstly, these promises are made to the nation of Israel in its national condition. This is apparent in the former of these quotations, from the contrast stated between Israel and the nations of the earth. In the second quotation, it is equally apparent from the consideration that the people are addressed in connection with their king. Secondly, the promises made in these instances are made on the condition that the nation should, quote, "hearken diligently to the voice of the Lord their God." Unquote. Thirdly, the obedience and fear required are regulated by the will of God revealed in the Scriptures. This is stated in the promises themselves. "For it is obedience to all the, quote, commandments which I command thee this day." Unquote. These include the moral law which had been just now given to the Jews, as well as those commandments that were peculiar to that people. The principle is applicable to all nations enjoying the light of divine revelation insofar as the moral law and precepts of universal equity are concerned. The local and temporary character of their ritual system and many of their judicial laws do not affect the permanency and perpetual obligation of such as were moral in their nature. Obedience to the moral law is included in the promises, and the universal obligation of the moral law shows that the promises were not peculiar to the Jewish nation, but common to all who enjoy divine revelation. Threatenings are denounced because of disobedience also. Quote, "But if ye will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall the hand of the Lord be against you, as it was against your fathers. Ye shall be consumed, both ye and your king. For the nation and kingdom that will not serve thee shall perish. Yea, those nations shall be utterly wasted." Unquote. Samuel 12, verses 15 and 25, and Isaiah 60, verse 12. Number 4. Civil society is a moral person and therefore under the same law as individuals. By a moral person is meant a number of individuals united in the social relation, having an understanding and a will common to the whole, and one common means of expressing the understanding and the will of the whole. A nation can deliberate, resolve, and act as a unit or whole. The resolves and acts of the majority are those of the nation or moral person. Quote, "Nations or states are bodies, politic societies of men united together for the purpose of promoting their mutual safety and advantage by the joint efforts of their combined strength. Such a society has her affairs and her interests. She deliberates and takes resolutions in common, thus becoming a moral person, who possesses an understanding and a will peculiar to herself and is susceptible of obligations and duties." Unquote. Vattel's Law of Nations. Nations, being moral persons, are capable of moral obligations and of being directed by the same principles and rules of action as individuals are. The law of God, which as a rule of action binds every individual in society, also binds the whole. It would be strange indeed if men, when they acted in concert, would be freed from obligation to obey that perfect rule of action which binds each one separately. If it were so, it would be an easy mode of becoming independent of the of the supreme ruler of heaven and earth. But the divine law cannot be set aside by any social contrivance. It lays hold on the individual and binds him to obedience in every possible relation. It is universally admitted that men are under obligation individually to make the Scriptures their rule of moral action, and their civil union in society cannot free them from the obligation of the same rule. Because, though united in society, they continue to be men, and the law takes hold of them as men in whatever relations they may be acting. Section 2. Explanation of the terms used in this chapter. Firstly, institution of civil government. Institution is that which determines the civil relation of rulers and ruled, giving existence to civil government as an appointed ordinance. Secondly, constitution of civil government. This is the actual organization of society into a particular national existence by embodying the abstract principle of institution into a concrete form of government. Thirdly, man's moral nature. This consists of the moral principles and endowments of the mind which are necessary to fit man as a proper subject of moral government. By these he is capable of understanding the meaning and perceiving the obligation of law as a rule of action. Fourthly, man's moral relations. These are twofold. One respects God, the other man. Endowed with a moral nature, man sustains to God the relation of being a proper subject of government and is bound to obey the law of God universally and without reserve. It is the relation of obligation and dependence. Man sustains to his fellow men the relation of obligation to perform certain duties to them. The summary of these is, quote, "Love thy neighbor as thyself," unquote. Fifthly, the law of nature. This is the law primarily revealed to Adam as the rule of his obedience. Like its author, this law is perfect and of perpetual obligation. It is incapable of change or improvement because it is perfect, and is always obligatory because of its continuous duration. The law of nature is a transcript of God's moral perfections. It is these perfections, embodied in the form of law to direct the action of rational creatures. It is identical with the moral law, a summary of which is given in the Ten Commandments, and more minutely exhibited in the moral precepts of the Bible. The moral law is no other than that universal law which binds all men to obedience always and in every place. The law of nature and the moral law are one and the same. To suppose the Decalogue to be different from the law of nature is to suppose that there are two moral laws. This is as absurd as to hold that there are two eternal self-existent beings. For as there is only one eternal self-existent being, the transcript of his nature must be one, whether as impressed in the moral nature of the creature or given in the form of a written law. The law of nature is identical with the moral law. This one law, however, has been revealed in two different ways, first in the moral constitution of man, and secondly in a written form, a summary of which is contained in the Decalogue or Ten Commandments. For the first of these modes of revelation, it has received the name law of nature. From the second, it has sometimes been called the supernatural revelation of the law of God, or the written law. But whenever or however revealed, it is one and the same law, differing not in its nature, but in the manner of its being made known. The entrance of sin into the world has not destroyed indeed the law, or abrogated its obligation, for either of these is impossible, but it has very much obliterated the record of the law from the tablet of the human heart. The law of indestruction, but the record of it may, and indeed but the law is indestructible, but the record of it may, and indeed has been nearly effaced from the mind of man. The traces which remain are only faint and imperfect characters. Quote, "This I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, that ye henceforth walk not as Gentiles walk in the vanity of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God, through the ignorance that is in them because of the blindness of their heart." Unquote. Ephesians 4, verses 17 and 18. In great mercy, God has given not a new law, but a new publication of the old law originally written on the heart of man. This republication constitutes the written law, or supernatural revelation of the divine will, is summarily contained in the Ten Commandments, and more fully exhibited in the moral precepts of divine revelation generally. Sixthly, light of nature. This has sometimes been confounded with the law of nature. They are, however, altogether distinct. The law of nature, as has been explained, is the universal law of action dictated by the Creator to man. The light of nature is the perception which man has of this rule of action. It is his knowledge of the law of nature. Originally man apprehended the law in all its length and breadth. The light of nature was then coextensive with the law of nature. The one was parallel and coincident with the other. But sin has quenched in a great measure the light of nature. The depraving influences of sin blinds the understanding and sears the conscience of men, so that he has not adequate views of duty. The light of nature is not competent to perceive the chains and obligations of the law of nature. The defect is not, however, in the law, but in man's incapacity to perceive the claims of the law and perform its obligations. The law is the same now as when first promulged to Adam, but man's capacity is not now equal to Adam's. The law remains unchanged, and like its author, unchangeable, but the light in man as a medium of perceiving it is lessened. Hence the need of a supernatural revelation. In a country where this is enjoyed, many things may be easily demonstrated to be agreeable to reason, which reason unaided could never have discovered. Such furnish no evidence whatever of the competency of the light of nature, for in such instances reason is aided and guided by supernatural revelation. To form a fair estimate of the light of nature, it must be seen as it exists among the heathens, where there are no supernatural revelation of the law. And there the light of nature is only darkness.